Hi, my name's Keith Cooper for Northlight Images, and in this video I'm going to address a subject I'm asked about quite often, which is the old question, why are my prints too dark? Now, the standard answer I always give is that your monitor is too bright, and in the vast majority of instances people have got their monitors set too bright, they edit pictures on the screen, they print them out and they come out too dark. So the simple fix is to reduce your monitor brightness, but that is a simple fix, and there are more complex ways you can address this, in particular in terms of setting up your viewing lighting for testing, for actually showing prints and things. So what I'm going to cover here is a little bit more numerical, a little bit more measurement based, rather than the usual, oh, just make it darker. Now, doesn't detract from my advice generally is that for most people, when they ask, my prints come out too dark, your monitor's too, but that's the easy answer. Now, what I'm doing here, and I've got it, to turn it on here, I have got an Ilfalux lamp. Now this, I've reviewed it elsewhere. I'll put a link to the notes in it. It's got adjustable color temperature, it's got adjustable brightness, and within limits, it's a reasonable way of evaluating prints. Now, one of the reasons I want to actually do some print evaluation, a little bit more technical than the, yeah, that looks okay approach, which when it comes down to it is fine if you've got the experience in doing it. One of the reasons I want to do this is I've got a Canon Pro 310 here, and I've got the older Canon Pro 300 here. The inks have changed slightly between them, and I'm looking to see what differences there are. Now, I'm going to be covering this in more detail, where I actually have some measurements and a few other things like that, but I'm just here looking at visual differences. Now, in terms of how we look at prints, it's worth noting that if I was to look at these in the professional viewing stand I've got, although it's an adjustable one, the normal setting for lighting levels would be 2,500, maybe a bit, 2,500, 3,000 lux. That's a measure of illuminance. Now, how do I know that brightness? Well, I've got various means of measuring it. This is one. I tested this little device flickering away here. This is a Datacolor Lightcolormeter. Now that's great. I've got it set, connected up to this iPad, and I can tell that the lighting here, at this point here, the level, it's coming in at about 880 lux. Now, I've got some little lights up here, I've got light over here so I can film and things, so this really is not an accurate setup in any way. But this is much dimmer than I would have in the full viewing stand. And in fact, prints viewed in the viewing stand, if they come out perfectly well in that, they're almost certainly going to look dark when viewed under normal circumstances. But let's get back to how I'm making these measurements. This is easy enough to use. I can set it. This does all sorts of things. I used this in evaluating the color temperature of a light recently and the settings and various stuff like that. This, in a way, is massive overkill. One of these is too expensive, what most people will want for printer testing. So, yeah, let's just turn this little one off. There we go. Let's turn that off. What I'm going to use, and these used to be really quite expensive. This is a model S8608 light meter. Now, I can't remember how much I paid for this one, but it was under £15. I've seen them advertised for far less. I've seen them advertised for far more, but the model number is an S8608. Now, if you do a search on S8608 light meter, you'll probably find them on offer. What it's got, it's a very simple thing, doesn't do much, does it well, has a little sensor with a cover over it now, and there is the sensor for measuring light levels. Now, it takes batteries, even comes with batteries, and I can just switch this on, and it's telling me that in the middle here, I've got a level of about 1,000 lux, and over the side here, I've got about 700. Now, immediately that tells me that in terms of side-by-side print evaluation, if I'm comparing two prints, then I have to bear in mind that there are only similar brightness levels in this middle area here, or here to here. So you need to be a bit careful. This light is probably not ideal for a huge great area like this, but it's very easy to show as an example of how it works. But anyway, the lux meter here is giving me a reading, and there's a few different, it's very easy to use. You can even have it in foot candles if you want, but yeah, lux is the standard way of measuring it. If you set your brightness levels to anything below about 400, 350 there, so as you drop below that, you will still see colour in it. But remember, we're not just doing the pure sort of numbers from printing here. We're dealing with what we see, and our colour vision does drop off quite noticeably. And you will find, and I just had a wander around the house before filming this, the viewing brightness using this, and remember, it will vary depending on the angle it's at. Nominally, you just lay it flat like that, and it's for measuring sort of lighting levels on desks and things like that. There we go. What's it telling me? Oh, 900 and something. The accuracy of this, by the way, is stated at 3% plus or minus 10 digits, which is not bad, you know, for something this cheap. I mean, these sort of meters used to cost hundreds of pounds. If you want something with all the advanced features that this has, then I think that's easily a couple of £100. I can't remember what the price of it, but that's a Bluetooth device, connects to phone, whatever, and you can just use that for values. But this, dead easy way of doing it. So I can measure my brightness. If I'm making a setup, a viewing setup, I might want to use several LED lamps you can make this as complex and expensive as you like, but you do need high CRI or color rendition index, high color quality lamps. They vary massively. So I know that different ones here, they've all got, they may have a color temperature on the box, but I know certainly from using the likes of this, that which I use in normal situation to balance the lighting for videos. I know that the colors vary widely. So if you're evaluating accurate colour, then the colour of this, and this is currently set at 4000, and these are just nominal values. It's set at 4000 there. This is, by the way, USB powered, and it's just running, so it works rather well. But if you're just setting this, just bear in mind that these numbers are for advisement only. Now, normally you'd view your prints at D50 or 5000. If I put this up to 5000, let's change that, it's going to come out quite blue here on this because I tend to film and have these monitors, these two here, set for a color temperature around about 4000. It just gives a good mix. It enables the screens to match things and prints and stuff like that. In fact, if I take this up to D65 or 6500, this should come out as a distinctly bluey light now. But if I put that back to, that's 3000, that's very warm. Let's put it back to 4000, that's good enough for testing that. So I've got this illuminated. Ideally for evaluating at prints, I want over 400, 500. So professionally, I would use 2000, but different circumstances which you're going to use a viewing cabinet like that. And I found I haven't got the viewing cabinet at the moment, it's in storage because we're in the process of moving home, and a lot of stuff has just been put away to make the move easier, and that included my viewing cabinet because I don't use it that often. So yeah, 400 to 500 here, it gives a good value. At the moment here, this is, well, that's 900, 600. I could drop the brightness a little bit there, and we've got 650 in the middle. Now, in walking around the house earlier, as I tested this, light values varied from out in the conservatory. We're on a bright sunny day. I think it was about somewhere around 40,000 lux. That's bright. That's at a level where your prints are going to start to fade if they're exposed to that. It's effectively daylight. But actually in the house, I noticed conditions varied, and it's daytime with some lights on, varied between 70 and 300. Now that means that all of those prints will look a little dark, potentially. One of the things you can do, is when you're doing your prints, you edit them normally, you can do your setup here. Incidentally, if you want to match the brightness here to the brightness on your screen, use a camera. Obviously not a coloured piece of paper, just a plain piece of paper here. Take a photograph or look at the metering settings of it, and then look at the metering settings of a white panel on your display, and you can match them up. You can see they should be vaguely similar. It does mean that if you go to these lengths, soft proofing is a little bit more reliable. Now, I regularly say that soft proofing is somewhat overrated. It is a useful tool, but to my mind it should not be an habitual part of your editing workflow. I do not think that every image needs to be soft proofed before printing. Why do I say that? Because encouraging people to rely on soft proofing in many ways, and I'm basing this on teaching experience, means that people don't spend enough time actually looking at prints, comparing prints, seeing how they look under different lighting, getting a feel for the fact that the print is the final step. Now, fine if you're making images for projection and images that are going to be used elsewhere. Yes, you edit them so they look great on the screen. But if you are making prints, it's the print what counts. So it doesn't matter if they don't match perfectly. Experience gets you around that. Now, there are times where you want to be technically more precise, certainly commercial work and things, but I'm talking about making nice pictures to put on your wall. So we've got brightness levels, and we've decided that in terms of viewing, somewhere the 400-500 gives you a good balance between the quality of your colour vision and reflecting reasonable lighting conditions in your home. It's worthwhile once you've got a print to match, and I suggest using a known test image for this. Now, known test images, I've got loads of them on the Northlight Images site. Put a link to them. I always suggest using, printing these as a way of looking at stuff. Print that known test image under this lighting, and I'm going to assume with a known test image that you've got your print set up okay. If it comes out glaringly wrong, that's a clue you've got something wrong somewhere. But anyway, we're going to assume that you can make a good print of a test image. Take that test image around your house and look at it in different situations against different walls, different lighting. And that will give you a feel. If that test image that looks great under this lighting, where you want to put your photo on a wall or something like that, and the test image looks a bit dark, that is a hint that actually the viewing lighting where you are is not bright enough, and you need to potentially bump up the brightness of the image before printing. Now, the simplest way of doing that, I do my editing in Photoshop, is to use a curves layer and just raise the midpoint slightly, and it just brightens the image. Doesn't affect the top end, doesn't affect the bottom end, just makes the whole image a little bit brighter. Just a simple curves adjustment. That's a great way of just boosting it a little bit. Some people might say, well, I want something more precise. Well, if you want more precise, the book I always recommend still, Real World Colour Management, Fraser et al. It's got loads of stuff about colour management in it, worth knowing. If you want to go by the numbers, great. Things like this can help you, but remember, they are only to assist you. A perfectly exposed and printed photograph that is a rubbish photograph will make a rubbish print. Don't ever forget that. All this stuff is just ways of, I suppose in a way, it's how I regard colour management. Getting things right first time more often. And also colour management helps me when things go wrong. It helps me nail down what I've done wrong. And I do make mistakes on these things even after years of doing it. Now, I don't have to do dozens and dozens of test prints to have a look at something. My workflow is reliable enough that I can predict what things are going to be like. And I will use sometimes soft proofing. These prints here, these are profiling prints. These is printed on the Pro 300. One is printed on the 310 here. These are the sheets I make profiles from. And this is the data from these that I will come back to when I do a closer look at the differences between these. But in terms of just looking at prints here, I've got this set up. You know, let's say I'm happy with these lighting levels. I've got that. That's the profiling sheets. What differences can I see between them? Well, if I actually put them a bit closer, so I'm comparing light with light under similar lighting levels. Now, anyone who shows you this on a video and says, "Here, look, the differences are obvious," well, I won't accuse them of chicanery, but, you know, I do not expect this video to show any difference between these. However, I can see, and I've looked at these before, I can see that the Pro 310 appears to be laying down a bit more ink than the 300 did. That means everything's just that little bit darker. But it also means that some of the colours are richer. Some of the dark colours in this look like dark colours rather than a slightly coloured grey. There is a slight difference between it. Now, it's almost imperceptible, and as I say, I will be surprised if there is any difference visible on the video whatsoever. Video is an absolutely hopeless medium for demonstrating things like this. But anyway, that is that, and I can see that, yeah, the colours are a little bit richer. Now remember, these are printed with no colour management, these targets. So we're seeing the basics of what the printer does when you send it the raw numbers, the colour for the colours. And yes, there is a slight difference. Bear in mind though, that's on testing target like this. What happens when I've made profiles? Well, here are two test images that I used. Now, these unfortunately are not in my test image collection because I use X-Rite i1 Profiler, and these images come with that software, and that's licensed software. So I use these for print evaluation and stuff, but I haven't got a license to actually make these available. These, the individual components of this can be found when you install a copy of i1 Profiler. It doesn't need to be a license, but when you install a copy, you will find these little images buried away in the software installed somewhere. Now, when I look at these, and these are very saturated colours. This is an image which is in the big ProPhoto colour space. Yeah, the black and whites look identical. Do I see any other colours? Yes, some in the backgrounds. There is a distinct bit of difference between them. Now, is it enough once again that it jumps out at you that if I just gave these two pictures to somebody and say what's different between them, anyone would notice? I don't know. Maybe a few people who have very acute colour vision and who were primed to be looking at colour differences might notice some subtle differences in the handling of dark blues, burgundies. The reds look slightly different as well. They shouldn't be that much different because it's the same. Most of this image is in gamut for both ink sets. The slightly different and larger in some respects, and this is printed on fine art smooth Canon paper. The differences we're seeing here are, I won't say it's darker. It shouldn't be darker really. They look very similar. I'd give the nod slightly to the colours on this. Now, I happen to know from looking at other papers that that is not universally true. I believe Hahnemühle, one of their sustainable luster type papers, I tried that and the results look slightly better on the 300. It's very much about the coatings of the paper. So that's, you know, that's those, yeah, there's a slight difference there. What about real world image? Now, this one here is one I've used several times, print of Ely Cathedral. I'll just put that up there, the two of them. Can I see differences there? This one looks a little more contrasty than this one. And I do check just to make sure. Yes, this is the 310. Now, under this light, can I see obvious? I still can't see obvious differences. But I'm looking for differences now. You know, this is beyond measurements and stuff. You know, which of these two prints would I like the best? I can see some details in some of these very dark coloured areas where the response just looks a bit smoother on this one than this one. There's nothing wrong with this one, and if you gave me that print and said what's wrong with it, I doubt I'd spot anything. I might say I'd like this area a little bit lighter, but when I print on here, this one, which has the slightly higher contrast, just shows it a little lighter. So yeah, there is a very subtle difference now. So I'll try them once again just to see there whether any difference shows on the video whatsoever, and say I will be surprised if it does, but you never know. So there we have, that's how I'd go about some print evaluation. Comes down to things like having a good light. Now this is by no means perfect for viewing lighting, but it does give a nice good area for that. If you're worried about light levels and getting things a little bit more precise, if your prints are coming out dark and you want to be a little bit more a little bit more detailed than just sort of reduce the level of your monitor, calibrate your monitor. Obviously I still say somewhere around about 100, depending on the room conditions. 120 may be better, or 90 may be better, but also look at your levels where you're doing your evaluation, and also the lighting levels that you're using where you're showing your prints. Makes a very big difference to it. This is stuff that, you know, I suppose in some ways you could say this is like taking your printmaking up a notch, being just that little bit more careful about it. How often do I do all of this stuff? Not that often, but enough that I have experience of it and I know it. One of these little meters is excellent. I said this one was, I believe, less than £15. It is perfectly accurate for this. If you want more, if you want to use it, studio setup and things like that, then this Datacolor one is really good. That works well, works with my phone, and I can connect this one to my Mac as well. And albeit the display still looks like a little phone display on it, which is mildly irksome because I don't use phones much. But yeah, it's a nice device. But I've covered that elsewhere. So, you know, how to take a bit more care with your print evaluation. If you've got any questions, let me know. If you'd like me to cover further aspects of this, yeah, feel free to drop me an email or something like that, because it's people's questions about stuff that often gives me ideas for things like this. And hopefully it gives you a few ideas about how far you want to go in your printing. And in particular, if you're producing prints that are going to be in sort of dim locations. It's quite perfectly possible, if you're doing lots of prints, to have a whole series of, say, Photoshop adjustment curves, that brightening curves, that bit where you just raise the midpoint, and you just name them after different bright lighting levels. And you just take this to where your prints are going to be shown, measure the lighting, remember to, you know, it varies, pointing, this is only give you a general idea, and use that to adjust the print for things. Likewise, if you are going to be exhibiting prints in very bright conditions, daylight conditions, then you may well actually need to dip the midpoint a bit to make your pictures, to push them the opposite way. So yeah, you can apply as many numbers as you like to this, but when it comes down to it, just always remember it's about the print, it's about it, what it looks like, and it's also what the print is about, the content of the print as well. So there you go. Hope that was of some interest, and thanks for watching. Bye.